Welcome to this edition of OVG Talks. I'm joined today by Billy FitzHerbert, our regional editor for the Middle East. My name's Oliver Cornock and I'm editor-in-chief here at Oxford Business Group. Billy, it's great to be with you. Lots of exciting things to talk about amidst all the rather gloomy headlines. And I think that's what we're going to try and strike at today, some of those silver linings perhaps. But first, could I ask you to set the scene first? The impact of COVID-19 has been really significant, particularly on those oil economies, as we've seen markets really go into negative territory earlier this week. Pretty dramatic news. What's going on in the Gulf?
Hi, Ollie. Thank you. Yes, it's an extraordinary time. Globally, of course it is, and also in the Gulf. And what we've seen there and how governments have responded is similar to countries around the world. We've seen countries go into lockdown, flights have been grounded, airports have been closed, and universities and schools have been, suspended for the time being, as have mosques. And non-essential businesses too closed down, and so economy is really sort of coming to a standstill in the Gulf. But the response in the region has been very comprehensive. I think most observers agree that the initiatives and the programs that have been put in place to stem the spread of the virus of COVID-19 are in line with WHO guidelines. They were acted upon speedily, quickly. They took the rapid response essentially, and I think that early action is going to stand these economies in good stead moving forward. Of course, there is a lot of uncertainty still, and we'll have to sort of see how it pans out in the weeks and months ahead.
Sure, I think we're all living with that uncertainty. And just on that, how we know there have been some fractures within the Gulf Cooperation Council. To what extent is it easy to say there was some coordination, or wasn't there any between individual states?
I think difficult to say. I think it was countries were responding on a case-by-case basis. Of course, there probably was a lot of perhaps behind-the-scenes dialogue in terms of repatriating citizens and that sort of thing. But I think it was certainly a case-by-case basis. But perhaps a knock-on effect we saw as one country sort of reacted and the rest of them followed suit. And it's very true that the response was very sort of coordinated in that sense, very streamlined.
Interesting. And in terms of the sort of broader repercussions, the financial repercussions, these are states that have been trying for a long time to diversify their economies. They all have long-term economic development strategies in place to reduce the involvement of the public sector and increase the autonomous private sector growth. What do you see as the immediate response to some of the economic impacts that have happened, and perhaps on those economic development goals?
Yes, well, I think on the economy, I think the main thing to talk about probably is the oil price situation, as we've seen. We have this unique demand and supply side issue now, where obviously demand has been hit by the closure of global economies. Cities are in lockdown, planes are grounded, and far fewer people are driving about on the roads. Then on the supply side, we saw the spat between Russia and Saudi earlier this year, which was resolved obviously in April. And when they agreed to cut almost 10 million barrels per day off the global market. But it's not enough to really mitigate against the huge drop-off in demand which we've seen in the global economy for oil. There's simply just too much on the market at the moment. And so, as one analyst I saw put it, the sort of producers are rushing to the taps to turn off the taps as the bath is overflowing almost. And so the repercussions of that for the economies in the regions which we cover. I think it's probably worth noting we've been here up to a point before recently. We saw the drop in global oil prices in 2014 when it went from over $120 a barrel down to below $30 a barrel in January 2016. And at that time, what we saw is that we saw a sort of acceleration of fiscal tightening in the region. We saw subsidy reductions in place. We saw belt tightening measures across the board in order to get the public finances on board. Now, are we going to see some of those reversed? It's possible.
Yeah. A really good point, the reversal of some of those really important changes that were made. For example, subsidy reduction. And Billy, that was one area where, for example, all organisations from the World Bank, the IMF, including Oxford Business Group, were very much advocating the reduction of those significant subsidies on on water, on electricity inputs. And I suppose in terms of the levers that these governments have to use as stimulus, they might reverse some of those. Perhaps that'll be more long-term than short-term response. We'll see, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we have to wait and see at this stage. As we said before, it's very unclear. I think one thing to also point out is the governments in the region will be turning to the debt markets, as they already have. In fact, I think I read that almost more than half of the bond issuances this month have been in emerging markets, have been from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. And so I think as these countries, which have obviously got very, very solid ratings from the international rating agencies, will increasingly turn to the debt market in order to finance these huge budget deficits, which are expected as a result of the oil price drop.
Absolutely, and of course that oil price is everything. But so too would be if that continued. If this was, dare I say it, a new normal of much lower oil prices for a relatively long time, it begs the question then how willing people would be to extend both credit and people would be keen to buy those bonds. I wonder if that would have an impact on the long-term sort of rating, but also appetite as well, because no matter how hard these economies have tried, the percentage of hydrocarbons in their economies has remained stubbornly high.
This is very true. This is very true.
So moving on where we started to some of these silver linings, as we must, obviously conscious that there's a lot of sort of human sadness around COVID, but also looking to some of those positives. The Gulf has got very young populations. Each country has got, majority of 65-70% of the population, I think, are under 25, 30. They're quite tech savvy. I'm assuming that e-commerce, health tech, ed tech are all coming to the fore here.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely, if one is to go looking for the positives, that's certainly one of them. I think we shouldn't move away from the fact that this is going to be an incredibly difficult time, not just regional economies, but the global economy. We're in for a rough time, but these silver linings are there. I mean, the digitization forms a massive plank of the various national development plans which are in place across the region. And as you say, we've seen a sort of shift towards e-commerce, we've seen a shift towards distance learning, e-health initiatives, and also the distance sort of banking as well. People having to sort of learn how to apply for loans, having to manage their finances remotely from their homes, from not being able to go and meet their bank manager. And so the financial technologies which are sort of bubbling away in the region are going to be accelerated, and that's going to be a huge sort of bonus, I think, to come out of this.
Because one of the concerns when I was speaking to people within the region on my last visit, obviously pre-COVID, was that there was actually a reluctance to go towards e-commerce, e-banking, for example, because certainly the older generation were very skeptical about the safety of it. Similarly with e-commerce, there were issues about fulfillment, the mall culture. Because of the frankly very hot temperatures, malls are places not just to go shopping, they're places to socialize, take your kids out. I wonder if this is just going to be a sort of a leapfrogging along, necessity being the mother of invention, I suppose. Yes,
I think there is. Yeah, I mean that will certainly come into play. I think rather than perhaps leapfrogging, I think we might see a merging of the two, particularly when it comes to things like retail and e-commerce. I think given the preponderance of malls in the region, and as you say, the sort of social importance they play, the social function, we might see a sort of merging of the online element with the bricks and mortar element. So as shops come to integrate their offerings. I've seen just yesterday, I read that Dubai Mall in Dubai had sort of moved its whole sort of shopping experience online. And to sort of integrate the two things. And so I think moving forward, perhaps that's what we're going to see more. We're going to see operators try to go online, but also maintain their sort of footprint in the sort of physical world, if you like.
Well, thank you very much. Billy. A really interesting conversation, and one that I'm sure will be continuing over the coming weeks. Much to watch out for there, not least that all-important oil story, which continues to play such an important part in these Gulf economies. Billy, thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Alex.